Emma Carter had always imagined herself as a warrior. Not the kind who fought wars on battlefields, but the kind who faced impossibly high walls, crushing waves, and tests designed to break even the strongest human spirit. Ever since she was a teenager, she had dreamed of joining the Navy SEALs, inspired by stories of bravery, resilience, and sheer determination. Her room was filled with books about elite soldiers, and her workouts pushed her body to its limits, day after day. Yet, nothing she had done in high school gyms or neighborhood obstacle courses could have prepared her for Bud S, the Navy's legendary basic underwater demolition, SEAL training. The first morning at the training camp felt like stepping into another world. The cold, salt air bit at her skin, and the relentless wind whipped across the beach, carrying a biting chill that seemed to slice right through her clothes. In front of her, a line of recruits, tall, muscular, and seemingly unshakable, moved with precise coordination. They sprinted across sand dunes, carried heavy logs, and executed push-ups in perfect unison, while instructors barked orders with voices that could freeze blood. Emma, small and lean, felt the weight of her own inadequacies pressing down on her like a physical force. Her first combat drill was deceptively simple on paper. Climb a rope suspended over a pit of sand, ring a bell at the top, and descend. Simple for some, but for Emma, it was a nightmare. Her arms shook violently, muscles trembling with effort. Sweat streamed down her face, stinging her eyes, but she refused to let go. Inch by excruciating inch, she climbed, her fingers raw and burning. At one point, she slipped, swinging dangerously, her body threatening to collapse. She landed painfully on the sand below, gasping for breath, her pride bruised far more than her body. The instructor's sharp whistles cut through the air, signaling failure. Emma's heart sank, but she clenched her jaw, determined to try again. The obstacle course that followed felt like a cruel joke. Walls too high to scale, balance beams wobbling underfoot, and heavy logs to carry across uneven terrain, all designed to test endurance, strategy, and nerve. Every step felt like a battle against her own body. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, and her hands were blistered from gripping ropes and wooden planks. Around her, peers completed the course with a terrifying fluidity that made it look effortless. Emma fell, stumbled, and struggled, often landing in the sand face first. She could hear the instructor's criticisms, sharp, unrelenting, and sometimes humiliating. Each failure sank her morale further, yet she refused to quit. By the end of the day, Emma could barely lift her arms. Her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible, her muscles screaming at her for mercy. But it wasn't just the physical pain, it was the mental weight. She watched her fellow recruits laugh as they recovered, moving with confidence and skill she couldn't yet grasp. Her mind spun with doubts. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this. Maybe she had been foolish to dream so big. But deep inside, a stubborn ember refused to die. She clenched her fists and muttered to herself, "I can do this. I will do this." Even the water drills were unforgiving. Recruits had to swim long distances in choppy, freezing water, dragging weighted ropes behind them. Each stroke left her gasping for air, her body numbing from the cold. The instructors moved along the edge of the water, shouting corrections and challenges. Some recruits seemed to glide through the water effortlessly, slicing through waves like predators. Emma flailed, struggling to maintain her form, her arms heavy, her legs aching. By the time she reached the shore, her teeth were chattering, and her fingers were nearly numb. She wanted to collapse, to curl up in the sand and give in, but she forced herself to stand, shivering, exhausted, yet unwilling to surrender. Her first week at Bud S was a series of failures, each one carving deeper into her confidence. Rope climbs, obstacle courses, swimming tests, she failed them all. The instructor's disapproving glances seemed to follow her everywhere, and whispers from other recruits made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She felt isolated, standing on the outskirts of a world where everyone else seemed to belong. Emma's self-doubt was relentless. She questioned her strength, her determination, even her dream. Yet, amid the bruises, blisters, and exhaustion, she discovered something important, an unwavering resolve to continue, no matter how difficult the road ahead. Late at night, Emma lay in her small, shared quarters, her body aching in protest. The other recruits slept, some exhausted, some whispering strategies to each other. Emma stared at the ceiling, replaying every failure, every humiliation. Her mind was a whirlwind of frustration and doubt. She knew that if she quit now, she would never forgive herself. But if she persisted, she might find a way to succeed where she had failed before. Somewhere in that storm of pain and uncertainty, a seed of hope began to grow, fragile yet persistent. It was during one of these quiet, reflective nights that she first noticed the difference between failure and learning. The injuries, the exhaustion, and the mistakes weren't just signs of inadequacy, they were feedback. Each failure was a lesson, a map showing where she needed to adjust, adapt, and push further. Emma began to understand that being a SEAL wasn't about raw strength alone. It was about resilience, strategy, and the relentless refusal to give up, no matter how impossible the challenge seemed. By the end of part 1, Emma was battered, exhausted, and demoralized, but not defeated. She was beginning to see the first glimmers of change. Her journey had only just begun, and she didn't yet know that a single encounter, a single moment of guidance, would transform everything she thought she knew about herself. What seemed like endless failure was merely the first chapter of a story that would test her body, mind, and soul, and ultimately reveal the strength she had never imagined she possessed. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Emma Carter dragged herself out of the freezing sand, muscles screaming in protest. Her body felt like it had been through a relentless storm, and her mind was no less battered. The previous day's failures clung to her like a second skin, each misstep replaying in vivid detail. Every recruit around her seemed to move with fluid precision, as if the grueling obstacles were mere warm-ups, yet Emma struggled just to keep pace. She could feel the weight of her inadequacy pressing down, a heavy shadow that seemed to grow larger with each passing moment. Bud S was unforgiving, a place where weakness could be fatal and failure was visible for all to see. Emma found herself watching her peers with a mixture of envy and despair. Men and women who had started the course like her now moved as if they were born for this. They scaled ropes effortlessly, sprinted across dunes without faltering, and carried massive logs as though they weighed nothing. In comparison, Emma's efforts were clumsy and awkward, a stark contrast to the natural fluidity around her. She fell behind constantly, her mistakes multiplying as exhaustion and frustration took their toll. Isolation crept in quietly, but with a merciless grip. While other recruits laughed and shared camaraderie during brief breaks, Emma found herself lingering on the sidelines, unsure of how to fit in. Her failures had made her wary. She didn't want to be the target of ridicule or pity. She watched them whisper, smile, and bond, feeling like an outsider in a world that demanded unity. She tried to ignore the stares of instructors, whose expressions ranged from disapproving to outright disappointment. But every glance felt like a needle piercing her resolve. Each critique, each sharp word, reminded her how far she had to go and how heavy the cost of failure could be. The mental pressure was as intense as the physical. Emma's mind constantly replayed each mistake, analyzing every misstep and wondering how she could have done better. Rope climbs, swimming drills, obstacle courses, they all haunted her thoughts, even during brief moments of rest. She questioned herself relentlessly. Am I cut out for this? Am I strong enough? Am I just pretending to be brave? These thoughts threatened to drown her, But somewhere deep inside, a stubborn ember refused to die. She forced herself to rise, to face the cold water, the burning muscles, and the endless sand with determination, even when her body begged for surrender. During one particularly grueling day, Emma faced a swimming drill that would define her sense of self. The ocean churned angrily, waves crashing against her as if mocking her struggle. Instructors barked orders from the shore, demanding perfect form, maximum speed, and endurance beyond imagination. Each stroke felt like swimming through molasses, her arms and legs burning with pain, lungs gasping for air. She looked around and saw her peers gliding through the waves, their movements precise and efficient. Emma's chest tightened not from exertion, but from a wave of frustration and humiliation. Every time she reached the shore, she felt both relief and the bitter sting of failure. Isolation was compounded by the subtle judgments of others. Some recruits whispered behind her back, making comments she could barely hear over the wind, yet they cut like knives. She's never going to make it. Look at her struggle. She's too weak. Every word weighed on her, adding to the mental load she already carried. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it didn't matter, but the truth was unavoidable. She felt alone. The camaraderie that bonded successful trainees seemed like a distant dream, something she could observe but never touch. By the end of that week, Emma's frustration had reached a boiling point. The obstacles, the drills, the relentless instructors, and the perceived superiority of her peers pressed down on her spirit like a vice. In moments of quiet reflection at night, she lay on the sand, staring at the dark, starlit sky, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Doubts gnawed at her relentlessly. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I should quit. The thought of giving up flirted with her mind, a tempting escape from the daily torment. But then she remembered why she had come, to prove herself, to achieve something extraordinary that few could even imagine. Despite the crushing isolation, Emma noticed something subtle, a small flicker of resilience she hadn't expected. She realized that failure, though painful, could be informative. Every fall taught her something about her body, her endurance, and her limits. She started to analyze her mistakes more carefully, asking herself not just what went wrong, but why. She began experimenting with small adjustments. A shift in grip while climbing, a different kick technique in the water, a change in breathing rhythm. The successes were tiny, at first a slightly faster climb, a smoother swim, but they planted seeds of hope that had been nearly buried under layers of frustration. One day, during a particularly punishing drill, Emma's isolation was compounded by exhaustion. The instructors had set up a multi-station course designed to test every muscle, every ounce of stamina, and every shred of mental focus. She moved through it slowly, methodically, refusing to quit even as her body screamed in protest. Her arms were raw from gripping ropes, her legs quivered under the weight of heavy logs, and her lungs felt as if they might explode with every breath. She stumbled multiple times, cursed under her breath, and pushed through sheer stubbornness. By the time she reached the final station, she was physically spent and emotionally drained, yet she refused to collapse completely. Even as failure followed her relentlessly, Emma noticed glimmers of change. A single nod from an instructor, a quiet word of acknowledgement, a brief pause of respect from a peer. These moments hinted that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely invisible. She began to understand that Bud S wasn't just about strength or speed, it was about persistence, mental adaptability, and the ability to absorb failure without letting it define you. The obstacles themselves weren't the true test. The real challenge was within her mind, the ability to endure, adapt, and rise again, no matter how many times she fell. At night, Emma reflected on the week, her body battered and sore, her mind exhausted, but her spirit oddly more alert. She realized that while she had failed every drill, she had also survived every trial. Every mistake, every fall, every harsh word from instructors had become a lesson in resilience. She began to think strategically, considering that perhaps the way she approached the challenges was the real problem, not her strength, her determination, or her worth. For the first time, the idea that change was possible began to take root. As part 2 closes, Emma stands at a crossroads. She is exhausted, frustrated, and still failing in many ways, yet something deep inside refuses to surrender. The isolation, the whispered judgments, the relentless physical demands, they have tested her body and mind, but they have also revealed a flicker of inner strength. She has not yet succeeded, but she is beginning to understand the first crucial lesson. Failure is not the end. It is the beginning of transformation, the seed from which resilience grows. Little does she know, the guidance she is about to receive will change everything, setting her on a path from despair to extraordinary achievement. Emma Carter had survived another brutal day at Bud S., her body aching from the relentless drills and her mind weighed down by exhaustion and frustration. Every failure seemed magnified in the harsh sunlight and the cold wind off the ocean. She had been at the bottom of every ranking, falling behind on obstacle courses, struggling in swimming drills, and failing rope climbs. Her morale wavered, and the isolation she felt grew heavier with each passing hour. The other recruits had begun to notice her repeated struggles. Some whispered doubts, others cast skeptical glances. Emma could feel herself being measured and judged by everyone, peers and instructors alike. But amidst the chaos of the day, a figure appeared on the beach that immediately commanded attention. Commander Jackson, a seasoned Navy SEAL, with decades of experience and a reputation for transforming the struggling into elite warriors, had arrived to observe the training. He was imposing, not just physically, but in presence. His gaze was sharp, assessing, piercing through the surface to see something deeper. He watched the recruits methodically, his eyes scanning for patterns, strengths, and weaknesses. Emma, exhausted and shivering from the water drills, caught his attention, not for her failures, but for her persistence. Even as she struggled, she refused to give up. Commander Jackson's experience had taught him to spot raw potential where others saw only weakness. He recognized that Emma, despite repeated failures, had an intangible quality that many lacked: determination. He had seen recruits like her before, those who fell repeatedly yet refused to quit, and he knew they were often the ones who became exceptional SEALs. He approached her cautiously, his steps deliberate and confident. Emma noticed him before he spoke, a tall figure, upright and steady, his presence demanding attention without a word. "Emma Carter?" he asked, his voice low but commanding. She straightened involuntarily, despite her exhaustion. Her heartbeat accelerated as she nodded. She had never met him before, yet somehow she knew this encounter would matter. He didn't smile, didn't scold, and didn't judge harshly. Instead, he looked her in the eye and studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the essence of who she was against the trials she had endured. Finally he spoke, choosing his words carefully. "Try differently." The simplicity of the words struck Emma like a bolt of lightning. She stared at him, confused yet intrigued. 2 words, so small, yet carrying a weight far beyond her comprehension. For weeks, she had been punishing herself for failure, pushing harder and harder, repeating the same methods over and over, hoping sheer effort would be enough. But Commander Jackson's words suggested that perhaps the problem wasn't her strength, her stamina, or her resolve. It was her approach. "Try differently," she whispered to herself later, replaying the words in her mind. She realized that every failure she had endured wasn't a sign of her inadequacy, but a signal pointing toward change. Maybe she had been approaching the drills the wrong way. Maybe she needed to adjust her strategy, focus on technique, or rethink her mindset. A seed of clarity began to grow, fragile but powerful, igniting a flicker of hope that had been nearly buried beneath layers of exhaustion and self-doubt. For the first time, Emma considered that her failures were not the end, but a guide. She began observing her movements carefully, analyzing how she climbed ropes, swam through choppy waters, and tackled obstacle courses. She noticed small errors, gripping too tightly, pacing herself unevenly, holding her breath incorrectly. Each observation became an opportunity to improve. Slowly, methodically, she began experimenting with adjustments, altering her technique, conserving energy strategically, and thinking through each movement rather than relying solely on brute force. The impact of Commander Jackson's words extended beyond technique. They transformed her mindset. Emma realized that mental resilience was as critical as physical strength. Bud S didn't just test muscles. It tested the ability to endure failure, to adapt under extreme pressure, and to maintain focus when every instinct screamed to quit. She understood that if she continued to repeat the same patterns of exhaustion and frustration, she would continue to fail. But if she approached each drill differently, thoughtfully, and strategically, she might succeed. Her first experiment was simple. During a swimming drill, instead of fighting the waves with brute strength, she adjusted her breathing rhythm, timed her strokes to conserve energy, and focused on smooth, efficient movements. The difference was subtle, but noticeable. She reached the shore slightly faster, less exhausted, and with more control. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. That small success ignited a spark of confidence. Perhaps she could do this. Perhaps she could survive, even thrive, in a place designed to break people. Over the next several days, Emma applied the same principle to other drills. Rope climbs became less about brute force and more about technique and rhythm. Obstacle courses were approached with careful planning, conserving energy where needed and exerting maximum effort strategically. She began to notice small improvements, less trembling in her arms, smoother transitions, slightly faster times. The instructors began to notice too, subtle nods of acknowledgement, the occasional approving glance. Even some peers began to offer quiet respect, observing her determination and methodical progress. Emma's mindset shift also affected her emotionally. The shame and self-doubt that had weighed her down were slowly replaced with curiosity and determination. She stopped comparing herself to others and focused on her own journey. Each failure was no longer a condemnation, but a lesson, a piece of a puzzle she was learning to solve. She began sleeping with a sense of purpose rather than dread, planning how to tackle the next day's grueling drills with a fresh perspective. The turning point came during a particularly punishing obstacle course. Weeks earlier, she would have stumbled, fallen, and struggled to complete it. But this time, she approached each segment differently. She measured her pace, adjusted her grip, and anticipated each challenge before it arrived. She faltered less, moved more fluidly, and when she crossed the finish line, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: pride. She looked back at the course, at the instructors, and at herself, realizing that the transformation had begun. She wasn't perfect, but she was no longer defined by her failures. Commander Jackson's presence lingered in her mind like a guiding force. Those two words, "try differently," had unlocked a door she hadn't realized existed. She began to see Bud S not just as a series of brutal tests, but as a series of opportunities. Every obstacle, every wave, every instructor's critique became a chance to learn, adapt, and grow stronger. The isolation, the humiliation, and the exhaustion were no longer purely burdens. They were teachers shaping her into something greater than she had imagined. By the end of Part 3, Emma had taken her first real steps toward transformation. She was still exhausted, still behind many of her peers in raw ability, and still far from the elite level demanded by the SEALs. But she had discovered the power of perspective, the value of adaptation. and the critical lesson that failure was not the end, but a stepping stone. The guidance of a single mentor, delivered in 2 simple words, had set her on a path that would change everything. She was no longer just a struggling recruit. She was a recruit beginning to understand the essence of what it meant to endure, adapt, and eventually conquer. Emma Carter woke before dawn, muscles aching in body, screaming from yesterday's grueling drills. Yet a quiet determination coursed through her veins, stark contrast to the fear and self-doubt that had plagued her for weeks. Commander Jackson's words, "Try differently," echoed in her mind, a mantra guiding every thought and movement. This simple advice had changed everything. No longer did she push blindly, trying to brute force her way through impossible obstacles. Instead, she approached each challenge with strategy, observation, and adaptability, treating failure as a lesson rather than a judgment. Her first conscious experiment occurred during the morning swim. Previously, the freezing ocean waves had battered her relentlessly, leaving her exhausted and defeated. But today, she analyzed the water's movements, timed her strokes with precision, and adjusted her breathing to conserve energy. The change was subtle, but measurable. She reached the shore with more control, less fatigue, and a flicker of confidence igniting within her. She realized for the first time that technique could compensate for raw strength, and that mental acuity was just as critical as physical ability. After the swim, she moved to the obstacle course, a seemingly endless gauntlet of walls, balance beams, ropes, and uneven terrain. In the past, she had attacked it with brute force, relying solely on her arms and legs and failing repeatedly. Today, she paused briefly at the start, visualizing each segment, anticipating where her balance might falter, and considering how best to distribute her energy. Her movements were deliberate, coordinated, and surprisingly efficient. She stumbled only once, a minor slip compared to the falls and crashes of earlier weeks. By the end, she had completed the course faster and more fluidly than ever before. For the first time, Emma felt the exhilarating taste of progress. She realized that improvement didn't come from pushing harder in the same way. It came from adapting, learning, and adjusting. Her mind began to see drills not as insurmountable tests, but as puzzles to be solved. Every failure provided a clue, every correction a key, and slowly her approach began to transform her performance. She started to embrace mistakes, studying them with a curiosity she had never felt before. Each error became a teacher rather than a source of shame. The instructors noticed the subtle change. While they had scowled at her fumbling attempts for weeks, today their expressions shifted. They observed her movements, nodding in acknowledgement at her growing efficiency. Some offered quiet advice, showing her small technical adjustments in rope climbing or obstacle navigation. Emma absorbed everything, applying each tip immediately. The combination of observation, reflection, and careful execution led to results she had never imagined possible. For the first time, she felt the confidence that had been buried under layers of fatigue and self-doubt beginning to surface. Her peers also began to notice. Whispers of admiration, once rare, began to circulate. A fellow recruit, who had once doubted her capabilities, nodded in approval after watching her complete a particularly challenging wall climb. Another offered a quiet "good job" after she finished a swimming drill efficiently. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like an outsider. She still lagged in raw strength compared to some of the more naturally gifted recruits, but she was no longer invisible. Her perseverance, combined with strategy and adaptation, was starting to command respect. Emma's shift wasn't limited to physical performance. It changed her emotional and mental approach as well. She began to anticipate challenges rather than react blindly, planning each step and adjusting as needed. The fear and humiliation that had once dominated her thoughts were replaced by curiosity and determination. She approached each drill as a problem to solve, a test of her intellect as much as her endurance. By reframing her perspective, she discovered a new kind of strength, a mental resilience that allowed her to endure pain, fatigue, and uncertainty with focus and clarity. One particularly grueling day, the instructors combined multiple exercises into a single, punishing gauntlet: swimming, obstacle navigation, log carries, and rope climbs, with no breaks in between. Recruits were expected to complete the sequence without error. In the past, Emma would have collapsed somewhere along the line, her exhaustion forcing her to quit. But today, she approached each segment strategically. She timed her strokes, calculated her energy expenditure, and used momentum rather than brute strength to scale walls. When she reached the final rope climb, her hands were raw, her legs trembling, yet she completed it with a precision and efficiency that stunned onlookers. The result was not just physical success, it was a transformation of identity. Emma began to see herself differently. She wasn't the weak, struggling recruit she had feared she was. She was capable of growth, of adapting under pressure, and of mastering challenges that had once seemed impossible. Every drop of sweat, every aching muscle, and every bruise became evidence of her evolution. Commander Jackson's words had unlocked a way of thinking that empowered her to turn failure into a tool for improvement rather than a source of despair. Even during moments of extreme fatigue, Emma noticed subtle internal shifts. She began to understand that SEAL training demanded more than raw power. It demanded the ability to think under pressure, to adjust instinctively, and to endure without surrender. She could no longer rely solely on determination and grit. She needed strategy, observation, and adaptability. This realization was profound. Strength alone was insufficient. Her mind was now as much a weapon as her body, guiding her movements, conserving energy, and enabling her to succeed where she had failed before. By the end of the week, Emma's progress was undeniable. Her peers and instructors began to take note, and the whispers of doubt that had followed her for so long were replaced by quiet acknowledgement of her growing skill. Emma herself felt a sense of pride she had never experienced during training. The drills that had once crushed her spirit were now challenges she could approach thoughtfully, overcome deliberately, and learn from strategically. She had begun the first real phase of transformation, mastering the mental game as much as the physical. Emma's confidence was still fragile, but it had been ignited. She began to approach the next set of challenges with a newfound clarity, ready to experiment, adjust, and improve with every step. The lessons she had learned, adaptability, strategy, observation, and resilience, were more valuable than any muscle or technique. She understood that her journey would still be grueling, filled with setbacks and pain, but she was no longer defined by failure. She was defined by her willingness to learn, adapt, and persist. As Part 4 closes, Emma stands on the beach, staring at the endless waves, reflecting on the transformation beginning to take shape. She is still exhausted, still far from perfect, and still facing monumental challenges, but something fundamental has changed. She now possesses the mindset of a true warrior, a strategic thinker, a resilient soul, and a fighter who refuses to be defined by her failures. What was once a world of despair is now a world of opportunity, and Emma is ready to continue her journey, one deliberate, thoughtful step at a time. The morning sun had barely pierced the horizon when Emma Carter stood on the sand, muscles still sore from weeks of grueling drills, yet her mind sharper than ever. Today was a critical combat drill, the one that had humiliated her repeatedly in the past. It was designed to test every skill she had learned: rope climbs, obstacle courses, swimming, navigation, and precision under exhaustion. Failure here would be visible, public, and undeniable. For weeks, this drill had been her nemesis, a constant reminder of her perceived inadequacy. But today, something inside her had shifted. She was not just a recruit. She was a strategist, a thinker, and a fighter. Her fellow recruits lined up alongside her, muscles flexing in preparation, eyes sharp with focus. Some glanced at her, their expressions skeptical, remembering the weeks of stumbles and near failures. Emma could feel their doubts, but instead of letting them weigh her down, she allowed them to sharpen her resolve. She had spent days learning from her mistakes, observing, adjusting, and applying every lesson Commander Jackson's words had ignited within her. Try differently. That simple phrase had become a guiding principle, and now it was time to see its power in action. The whistle blew, a sharp, cutting sound that signaled the start. Emma sprang forward, every movement deliberate, calculated. Where once she had relied on brute force, now she relied on technique, efficiency, and focus. Her arms pumped with precision during the swimming section, timing each stroke to conserve energy while maximizing speed. She reached the shoreline faster than she had ever managed, lungs burning but mind clear. For the first time, she felt a thrilling sense of control rather than desperation. Each small success fueled her determination, reminding her that she was capable of progress. Next came the obstacle course, the part of the drill that had once crushed her confidence repeatedly. Walls loomed, balance beams wobbled, ropes swung dangerously in the wind. Emma paused briefly at the start, visualizing each segment, recalling every adjustment she had learned over the past weeks. Her fingers gripped the rope with calculated pressure, her legs pushed with rhythm, and she moved fluidly from one obstacle to the next. She stumbled once, a minor slip that would have been catastrophic weeks ago, but she recovered instantly, adjusting her movements mid-air. For the first time, she realized she could anticipate challenges rather than merely react to them. The instructors watched closely, their eyes sharp and critical, yet they could not hide their surprise. Emma had always been at the bottom of the rankings, often failing publicly, yet now she moved with precision and focus that rivaled the top recruits. Each obstacle she overcame, each task she completed efficiently, was a testament not just to physical skill, but to mental resilience, strategy, and adaptation. The whispers among her peers shifted from doubt to cautious admiration. Some began to nod subtly, acknowledging the transformation taking place before their eyes. Her confidence grew with each success, fueling her performance. She approached the log carry with measured energy, maintaining a steady pace without exhausting herself. The sand beneath her feet seemed less like an enemy and more like a canvas on which she could demonstrate control and skill. Her muscles ached, yet they obeyed her instructions with newfound precision. She was no longer reacting to the course with panic and desperation. She was mastering it. Commander Jackson's words echoed in her mind, "Try differently." She had done exactly that, and the results were undeniable. When she reached the final rope climb of the drill, her body trembled from exhaustion, her hands raw and blistered, her legs burning. In the past, this was the point where she had faltered, slid down, and failed. Today, she assessed the rope, calculated her grip, and used a combination of strength and technique she had learned through observation and trial. Inch by excruciating inch, she ascended, her body screaming in protest, but her mind steady and focused. When she finally rang the bell at the top, she felt a surge of exhilaration unlike anything she had experienced before. She descended carefully, knowing that this drill was not yet complete. As she crossed the final line, instructors called out her time. It was not perfect, but it was impressive far beyond anything she had previously achieved. For the first time, Emma felt the thrill of victory born not from luck, but from strategy, adaptation, and persistence. Her peers looked at her with newfound respect, and the instructors nodded, some offering brief but meaningful words of acknowledgement. Emma realized that this victory was not just physical, it was a transformation of identity. In that moment, Emma understood the true power of failure and learning. Every fall, every mistake, every moment of frustration had been a step toward this achievement. The lessons she had absorbed from repeated mistakes, combined with the clarity inspired by Commander Jackson's guidance, had allowed her to turn what once seemed impossible into a tangible success. She smiled, exhausted but exhilarated, knowing that this was just the beginning of her transformation. The emotional impact of this victory was profound. For weeks, she had been defined by failure, by stumbles, and by the whispers of doubt from peers and instructors alike. Now, she saw herself differently. She realized that her strength was not just in her muscles, but in her mind, her ability to observe, adapt, and endure. This drill, which had once been her greatest source of humiliation, had become the first proof that she could succeed, that she could rise above her previous limitations, and that her determination, when combined with strategy, was unstoppable. The sense of pride was coupled with a renewed understanding of what lay ahead. But this was far from over. The challenges would grow harsher, more punishing, and designed to break the strongest spirits. Yet Emma no longer feared them. She had discovered the method for turning failure into fuel, pain into guidance, and exhaustion into progress. The lesson was clear. She could endure, adapt, and overcome any challenge if she approached it thoughtfully and strategically. That evening, as she lay in her small bunk, muscles trembling from exhaustion, Emma reflected on the day. The success of the drill was more than a personal victory. It was a turning point in her journey. She had begun to understand a profound truth that had eluded her for so long. Success was not about raw strength or brute force. It was about learning, adapting, and executing with intention. Commander Jackson's words had unlocked this realization, but it was her own resilience and willingness to change that had brought it to life. By the end of Part 5, Emma Carter was no longer the struggling recruit who had been crushed by every obstacle. She had faced her most feared drill and emerged victorious, not by luck, but through strategy, reflection, and determination. Her peers and instructors recognized her growth, and she herself felt the transformation taking root within her. She knew that Bud S. would continue to push her to extremes, but she now possessed the tools to meet every challenge with confidence, adaptability, and mental clarity. The first major victory was hers, and it had changed everything. The morning sun had barely pierced the horizon when Emma Carter stood on the sand, muscles still sore from weeks of grueling drills, yet her mind sharper than ever. Today was a critical combat drill, the one that had humiliated her repeatedly in the past. It was designed to test every skill she had learned: rope climbs, obstacle courses, swimming, navigation, and precision under exhaustion. Failure here would be visible, public, and undeniable. For weeks, this drill had been her nemesis, a constant reminder of her perceived inadequacy. But today, something inside her had shifted. She was not just a recruit. She was a strategist, a thinker, and a fighter. Her fellow recruits lined up alongside her, muscles flexing in preparation, eyes sharp with focus. Some glanced at her, their expressions skeptical, remembering the weeks of stumbles and near failures. Emma could feel their doubts, but instead of letting them weigh her down, she allowed them to sharpen her resolve. She had spent days learning from her mistakes, observing, adjusting, and applying every lesson Commander Jackson's words had ignited within her. Try differently. That simple phrase had become a guiding principle, and now it was time to see its power in action. The whistle blew, a sharp, cutting sound that signaled the start. Emma sprang forward, every movement deliberate, calculated. Where once she had relied on brute force, now she relied on technique, efficiency, and focus. Her arms pumped with precision during the swimming section, timing each stroke to conserve energy while maximizing speed. She reached the shoreline faster than she had ever managed, lungs burning but mind clear. For the first time, she felt a thrilling sense of control rather than desperation. Each small success fueled her determination, reminding her that she was capable of progress. Next came the obstacle course, the part of the drill that had once crushed her confidence repeatedly. Walls loomed, balance beams wobbled, ropes swung dangerously in the wind. Emma paused briefly at the start, visualizing each segment, recalling every adjustment she had learned over the past weeks. Her fingers gripped the rope with calculated pressure, her legs pushed with rhythm, and she moved fluidly from one obstacle to the next. She stumbled once, a minor slip that would have been catastrophic weeks ago, but she recovered instantly, adjusting her movements mid-air. For the first time, she realized she could anticipate challenges rather than merely react to them. The instructors watched closely, their eyes sharp and critical, yet they could not hide their surprise. Emma had always been at the bottom of the rankings, often failing publicly, yet now she moved with precision and focus that rivaled the top recruits. Each obstacle she overcame, each task she completed efficiently, was a testament not just to physical skill, but to mental resilience, strategy, and adaptation. The whispers among her peers shifted from doubt to cautious admiration. Some began to nod subtly, acknowledging the transformation taking place before their eyes. Her confidence grew with each success, fueling her performance. She approached the log carry with measured energy, maintaining a steady pace without exhausting herself. The sand beneath her feet seemed less like an enemy and more like a canvas on which she could demonstrate control and skill. Her muscles ached, yet they obeyed her instructions with newfound precision. She was no longer reacting to the course with panic and desperation. She was mastering it. Commander Jackson's words echoed in her mind, "Try differently." She had done exactly that, and the results were undeniable. When she reached the final rope climb of the drill, her body trembled from exhaustion, her hands raw and blistered, her legs burning. In the past, this was the point where she had faltered, slid down, and failed. Today, she assessed the rope, calculated her grip, and used a combination of strength and technique she had learned through observation and trial. Inch by excruciating inch, she ascended, her body screaming in protest, but her mind steady and focused. When she finally rang the bell at the top, she felt a surge of exhilaration unlike anything she had experienced before. She descended carefully, knowing that this drill was not yet complete. As she crossed the final line, instructors called out her time. It was not perfect, but it was impressive far beyond anything she had previously achieved. For the first time, Emma felt the thrill of victory born not from luck, but from strategy, adaptation, and persistence. Her peers looked at her with newfound respect, and the instructors nodded, some offering brief but meaningful words of acknowledgement. Emma realized that this victory was not just physical, it was a transformation of identity. In that moment, Emma understood the true power of failure and learning. Every fall, every mistake, every moment of frustration had been a step toward this achievement. The lessons she had absorbed from repeated mistakes, combined with the clarity inspired by Commander Jackson's guidance, had allowed her to turn what once seemed impossible into a tangible success. She smiled, exhausted but exhilarated, knowing that this was just the beginning of her transformation. The emotional impact of this victory was profound. For weeks, she had been defined by failure, by stumbles, and by the whispers of doubt from peers and instructors alike. Now, she saw herself differently. She realized that her strength was not just in her muscles, but in her mind, her ability to observe, adapt, and endure. This drill, which had once been her greatest source of humiliation, had become the first proof that she could succeed, that she could rise above her previous limitations, and that her determination, when combined with strategy, was unstoppable. The sense of pride was coupled with a renewed understanding of what lay ahead. But this was far from over. The challenges would grow harsher, more punishing, and designed to break the strongest spirits. Yet Emma no longer feared them. She had discovered the method for turning failure into fuel, pain into guidance, and exhaustion into progress. The lesson was clear. She could endure, adapt, and overcome any challenge if she approached it thoughtfully and strategically. That evening, as she lay in her small bunk, muscles trembling from exhaustion, Emma reflected on the day. The success of the drill was more than a personal victory. It was a turning point in her journey. She had begun to understand the profound truth that had eluded her for so long. Success was not about raw strength or brute force. It was about learning, adapting, and executing with intention. Commander Jackson's words had unlocked this realization, but it was her own resilience and willingness to change that had brought it to life. By the end of Part 5, Emma Carter was no longer the struggling recruit who had been crushed by every obstacle. She had faced her most feared drill and emerged victorious, not by luck, but through strategy, reflection, and determination. Her peers and instructors recognized her growth, and she herself felt the transformation taking root within her. She knew that Bud S. would continue to push her to extremes, but she now possessed the tools to meet every challenge with confidence, adaptability, and mental clarity. The first major victory was hers, and it had changed everything. Hell Week had arrived, and the world Emma Carter had been preparing for felt more unforgiving than ever. Bud S. had pushed her through pain, exhaustion, and repeated failures, but nothing could have prepared her for this. It was a grueling test of endurance, strength, and mental fortitude, designed to separate the determined from the defeated. From the moment the sun barely peeked over the horizon to the black hours of night, recruits were tested to their absolute limits. Sleep was non-existent, the water icy, the sand burning hot beneath their feet, and the drills relentless. Emma's body screamed in protest from every previous workout, every fall, every long, punishing swim. Her muscles throbbed, her joints ached, and each breath felt heavy, as if the very air carried weight. Yet, unlike before, she had a strategy. She had learned to adapt, to analyze every obstacle, and to approach challenges thoughtfully, rather than relying solely on strength. Try differently, Commander Jackson's words echoed in her mind, a guiding mantra that had become her lifeline. Every movement, every decision, every stroke in the freezing water was deliberate and calculated. The first challenge of Hell Week was the infamous log carry across the sand dunes. Recruits were paired, forced to work in perfect unison while carrying massive wooden logs, all under the watchful eyes of instructors, ready to penalize even the smallest lapse. Emma paired with a physically stronger recruit who moved confidently but struggled with teamwork. She had learned that brute force alone would not carry them through. Instead, she focused on rhythm, communication, and anticipating each movement. She called out cues, adjusted their pace, and balanced the load strategically. Slowly, the once torturous task became manageable, and they crossed the dunes without incident. Next came the endless ocean swims, dragging weighted ropes behind them, the water cold enough to numb fingers and toes within moments. Emma felt the icy grip of the waves and the heavy resistance of the ropes, yet she moved with careful efficiency. Where once she flailed, she now timed each stroke, adjusted her breathing, and focused on conserving energy. Fellow recruits struggled around her, but she pushed forward with a quiet determination. Her muscles screamed, lungs burned, yet her mind remained sharp. Each stroke, each kick, each calculated movement brought her closer to mastery over a challenge that had once seemed insurmountable. The obstacles didn't stop. Rope climbs over water, crawling through freezing mud, carrying teammates who had faltered, and executing navigation exercises in near darkness tested every facet of human endurance. Emma had faced each individually before, but Hell Week demanded perfection under unrelenting pressure. Her peers faltered, some giving in to exhaustion or despair, yet Emma drew strength from her mindset shift. Every failure became feedback, every mistake a lesson. She adapted instinctively, adjusting grip, conserving energy, and anticipating challenges before they appeared. Teamwork became paramount. Emma had always worked independently, but Hell Week forced her to rely on others while ensuring they could rely on her. She supported struggling teammates, encouraging them, redistributing weight during carries, and taking the lead during navigation exercises. She had transformed from a struggling individual into a competent team player, guiding others while managing her own fatigue. The instructors noticed the change, nodding at her coordination and leadership, even in the chaos. Emma realized that her growth wasn't just physical or mental, it was also social and strategic. Sleep deprivation became an enemy of its own. Hours blurred into one another, and exhaustion warped perception. Recruits collapsed on the sand, only to be ordered back into action. Emma felt her body teetering on the edge of collapse multiple times, yet she forced herself to focus on the immediate task rather than the endless chain of challenges ahead. She had learned to break massive challenges into manageable steps, tackling one obstacle at a time. This mental adaptation kept her moving forward when others faltered. Each small victory fueled the next, building momentum against fatigue, pain, and despair. During one particularly punishing segment, recruits were required to swim through freezing surf while carrying teammates who could no longer move. Emma's own muscles screamed, but she focused on rhythm, breathing, and positioning. Her teammate, exhausted and shivering, leaned on her strength, trusting Emma's control. Inch by inch, they moved through the waves, reaching the shore battered, cold, and exhausted, but victorious. This moment crystallized everything Emma had learned. Her strength was not in isolation, but in adaptation, strategy, and the ability to combine mental acuity with physical endurance. By the end of the fourth day of Hell Week, Emma's transformation was evident. She had survived the impossible, completed tasks that had defeated others, and supported her teammates through their struggles. The instructors, once skeptical of her abilities, now regarded her with respect. Her peers, too, had shifted in perception, seeing Emma not as the struggling recruit she had once been, but as a capable, adaptable, and resilient force. She had endured pain, isolation, and extreme physical challenges, emerging stronger, sharper, and more confident than ever. Even the mental challenges of Hell Week became arenas for growth. Emma faced constant uncertainty, unpredictable shifts in drills, and relentless instructor scrutiny. Each challenge tested her patience, focus, and decision-making under extreme fatigue. Yet she approached every situation strategically, calculating risks, conserving energy, and adjusting her approach in real time. She realized that the true test of SEAL was not just strength or endurance, but the ability to think clearly under pressure, make smart decisions, and inspire confidence in others. When the final night of Hell Week arrived, Emma was physically and mentally exhausted beyond words. Her muscles ached, her joints burned, and her mind teetered on the edge of collapse. Yet she stood upright, ready for the final series of grueling exercises. Every previous challenge, every failure, and every lesson had prepared her for this moment. She moved with precision, guiding her teammates when needed, executing each drill with strategy, and pushing through the pain with mental clarity. By the end, she had completed every task, survived every punishment, and emerged not just unbroken, but transformed. As dawn broke on the last day, Emma Carter stood on the beach, soaked, sand-caked, exhausted, but unbowed. She reflected on the journey she had endured, the early failures, the isolation, the repeated humiliation, and the painful lessons learned. She realized that Hell Week had tested her body, mind, and spirit in ways she had never imagined, and yet she had survived and thrived. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the struggling recruit who doubted herself at every turn. She was resilient, adaptable, strategic, and capable of enduring unimaginable challenges. Commander Jackson's words echoed in her mind one last time. Try differently. They had been the spark that ignited her transformation, guiding her through the darkest, most punishing moments of her training. Emma understood now that those two words represented more than advice. They were a philosophy, a way of life that would carry her through the most extreme challenges a SEAL could face. She had turned failure into feedback, weakness into strategy, and exhaustion into triumph. By the conclusion of Hell Week, Emma had proven herself not just to her instructors or peers, but to herself. She had transformed from a struggling, self-doubting recruit into a capable, resilient SEAL in training. The lessons she had learned: adaptability, mental toughness, strategy, teamwork, and resilience would define her career and her life. She was no longer merely surviving. She was thriving, ready for any challenge that came her way. The ultimate trial had been conquered, and Emma Carter had emerged forever changed. Weeks had passed since Emma Carter had survived the grueling Hell Week, yet the lessons she had learned continued to shape her every move. Bud S. was relentless, never pausing, never forgiving, but Emma now faced every challenge with a combination of mental clarity, strategy, and resilience that had once seemed impossible. She had transformed from the struggling recruit who had been at the bottom of every ranking into someone her peers and instructors began to take seriously. The whispers of doubt that had followed her weeks ago were gone, replaced by curiosity and respect. Her first test after Hell Week was a complex navigation exercise designed to challenge not only physical endurance, but also mental precision under stress. Recruits were required to chart a course across difficult terrain, coordinating with teammates while managing exhaustion and limited resources. Previously, this exercise had intimidated Emma, leaving her confused and hesitant. But now she approached it differently. She observed her surroundings carefully, calculated the most efficient routes, and communicated clearly with her team. Where once she might have panicked, she now acted decisively, combining strategy with endurance. Her instructors, known for their critical eyes and relentless standards, began to notice her growth. Commander Jackson, who had been a pivotal influence on her mindset, observed with a quiet satisfaction. He had seen the transformation firsthand. A recruit who had once been defined by failure was now defined by perseverance, adaptability, and intelligence. Emma's improvement was not only physical, but deeply mental. Her body still ached from previous weeks, yet her mind was alert, focused, and ready to lead when necessary. One day, a particularly punishing team drill required Emma to coordinate with her peers to complete a series of high-intensity obstacles while carrying weighted packs. The exercise was designed to test both endurance and leadership under extreme pressure. Emma's partner, a recruit who had previously been skeptical of her abilities, struggled under the weight and terrain. Rather than panicking or taking over entirely, Emma guided her partner, offering precise instructions, encouragement, and tactical adjustments. They completed the drill efficiently, and the instructors noted Emma's ability to combine physical skill with strategic leadership. This recognition wasn't limited to instructors. Her peers began to see her in a new light. The same recruits who had once whispered doubts now looked to her for guidance, observing her technique, asking for advice, and even offering silent nods of respect. Emma realized that her growth extended beyond personal achievement. She was now influencing the dynamics of her team, becoming a source of strength for others. This was a new and profound aspect of her transformation. Leadership earned through example, not authority. The culmination of her rising recognition came during a particularly challenging combat drill involving live simulations, tactical maneuvers, and precise timing. Emma approached each element with the deliberate strategy she had cultivated over weeks of adaptation. She analyzed the terrain, coordinated movements with teammates, and adjusted in real time to unexpected obstacles. Her body executed the techniques flawlessly. Her mind remained sharp under pressure, and her team responded to her guidance with confidence. By the time they completed the simulation, Emma had achieved not just personal success, but team success, cementing her emerging role as a leader. Emotionally, the impact was profound. Emma reflected on how far she had come, from the isolated, exhausted recruit who had failed every drill to someone now recognized for skill, strategy, and leadership. The confidence she gained was no longer superficial. It was rooted in demonstrated ability and experience. She understood that resilience was not simply enduring pain, but transforming every failure and challenge into a learning opportunity, a perspective that would define her career and her approach to life. Commander Jackson acknowledged her progress privately one afternoon. "You've changed, Emma," he said, his tone firm yet approving. "Not because you're stronger, but because you've learned how to think, adapt, and lead. That's what makes a SEAL." Those words resonated deeply. Emma realized that the journey was not merely about surviving physical challenges, but mastering the combination of mind, body, and spirit. Leadership, strategy, adaptability, these were the qualities that separated elite operators from the rest. Her confidence in herself now influenced her performance across all drills. Rope climbs, swimming, obstacle courses, and tactical simulations were approached with precision, calculation, and calm determination. She no longer feared failure, but embraced the lessons it offered. Every time she stumbled, she analyzed the misstep, adjusted, and executed better on the next attempt. This iterative process, born from Commander Jackson's 2 words, had become her secret weapon, a method for continuous improvement under extreme pressure. The transformation also had social and psychological effects. Emma's peers, once distant or skeptical, began to include her in strategy discussions, sought her opinion during drills, and even relied on her guidance during group exercises. She had earned their respect not through dominance or force, but through persistence, intelligence, and the ability to rise above adversity. This new social integration strengthened her mental resilience further, reinforcing the lessons that growth comes not only from individual effort, but from collaboration and trust. As the weeks progressed, Emma continued to excel, tackling increasingly complex challenges that once would have overwhelmed her. She became a model of persistence, strategy, and adaptability. Her instructors began to point her out during training as an example of what mindset and determination could achieve. Emma, who had once been invisible, was now recognized as someone capable of inspiring others and transforming challenges into opportunities. The respect she earned was not superficial. It was based on observed skill, strategic thought, and unwavering persistence under pressure. By the end of Part 7, Emma Carter had fully transformed in the eyes of both herself and those around her. She was no longer the struggling recruit who doubted her every move. She was a competent, confident, and strategic trainee with the ability to lead, inspire, and endure challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. Her journey from failure to recognition was complete in this phase, marked not only by improved skill, but by the emergence of leadership, adaptability, and mental toughness. She now understood the full meaning of Commander Jackson's advice: try differently. It was not just a tactical principle. It was a life philosophy, a lens through which she could approach every challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. Emma's transformation was profound. She had become a rising SEAL, defined not by past failures, but by resilience, intelligence, adaptability, and emerging leadership. Every obstacle conquered, every challenge met, and every lesson learned had prepared her for the final phase of her journey, the ultimate test of everything she had become. The path ahead remained grueling, but Emma faced it with a certainty she had never known. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving, and nothing could break her resolve.